Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is the Blue Line Blast podcast. I'm your host, Jim Biringer, alongside Matthew Blittner. Guys, check it up on YouTube. Follow along, subscribe, comment. The Stanley Cup final, it's over. Carolina Hurricanes are the Stanley Cup champions. They defeat the Vegas Golden Knights 3-0 in Game 6. The Stanley Cup final. Before we do a deep dive, Matthew, what's going on?
Not much, Jim. And you know what? I have to say this. You and I, we were both wrong. We both got the amount of game. We both got the amount of games right. We both said 6 games.
All right, so 50% we got right.
But we had the team wrong. So at least, you know what? We're batting 500.
I'll take 500. But I'm going to say this before we go into the deep dive. I'm going to say this. The whole, besides Brandon Bussi, we'll get into him. The whole series changed when Logan Stankoven scored in Game 2 under 10 minutes left because Carter Hart was pitching a shutout. Vegas was completely dominating that game. And I think if Vegas wins that game, they're probably winning the series. But Carolina found a way to fight adversity, get back into the series. And once they clawed back at Game 3, won Game 4, they just steamrolled the rest of the way.
So I agree with you. But before we get into the deep dive, I do have to say as well, although this past weekend might have been one of the best, if not at least better, overall sports weekends that we've seen in some time.
Yes, absolutely, 100%.
The NBA Finals end Saturday, the Knicks ending a 53-year drought, and then 24 hours later, we see the Stanley Cup Final come to an end in Game 6, with Carolina ending a 20-year drought. So you had two teams who had a collective 73 years of no championships win on back-to-back nights
on the road.
On the road, both of them. And both teams went 16-3 during their respective playoff runs.
That's Jim, unbelievable.
That has to be, if that's not at least one of the best, it has to be one of the better sports weekends in recent vintage.
I mean, I think it's got to be one of the better ones, maybe if not the best one, because like you said, you had, and both series, the NBA Finals and the Stanley Cup Final were really entertaining. Like, sometimes one's okay and the other one's really good, or like the NBA is good and the Stanley Cup Finals, Both final games were great. And the comebacks in both games, the entertainment, the ratings, people were watching it all. This weekend, you wanted to be locked in, whether you're a Knicks fan, whether you're a Kane fan, didn't matter. The sports weekend delivered. Championships decided. New champs in either sport. Like you said, Carolina, 20-year drought. Rod Brind'Amour captained the Hurricanes in 2006. Head coach in 2026. What a story for the Carolina Hurricanes.
One of only 4 people in the history of the NHL to do that, by the way. I believe the last one was Toe Blake.
Yeah, a while ago.
Many moons ago.
Many moons, decades ago. Decades.
Right. So, predating both the Carolina drought and the Knicks drought.
Yes.
So,
yes. We're going back to like the 1950s with the Toe Blake reference.
Just goes to show how rare it is. And Jim, and we're going to get into it a little bit as well with our special guest, Aaron Portzline from The Athletic, who covers the Columbus Blue Jackets later on in the show. But in my opinion, and I know you have your opinion about Stankoven, the series, in my personal opinion, turned fully, not partially. It wasn't a tweener anymore. It fully turned when Freddie Anderson got hurt and Rod Brind'Amour chose, okay, well, you know what? He's hurt, but, maybe he could play. But you know what? I'm going to go with Brandon Bussi while John Tortorella watching Carter Hart have arguably the worst statistical performance by a goaltender in a Stanley Cup Final, stuck with him all the way, even called out a reporter for saying, oh, that's...
I was there for that question.
He would consider going to Adin Hill. The series fully turned when one coach had the cojones to make the switch and the other coach did not.
I mean, look, Brandon Bussi comes in Game 3, right? Plays the first overtime, and they lose in double overtime. But he got 2 full periods under his belt, similar to Alex Lyon coming in that third period way back in round 1 against Boston, right? He got into the series. He felt his way into the series. So they had to go to him in game 4, but Anderson doesn't dress. He's a healthy scratch. Okay. Plays excellent, gives up a couple goals, but Carolina wins. Okay. They find a way to win, and they go back tied 2-2, right? Jordan Staal gets some big goals, and now that highlight's going to go down in infamy, and it's going to be played forever now for the Carolina Hurricanes. Him on his stomach going like this after he broke the tie. Like that, those are one of those moments that you won't forget in a Stanley Cup final. But then he delivers at home. He's coming up with big saves. And again, it goes back to the goaltenders. Like Anderson is a butterfly goalie, and he works with it well in that Carolina system. When the system breaks down and he can't move laterally side to side, and he said he tweaked his knee in game 2 and tried to fight through it and just couldn't do it in game 3 and came out. Well, Bussy's so unorthodox that if the system breaks down, he can just forget about his form and just go try to stop the puck. And that's what he did. And he came up with unbelievable saves in game 6. I mean, the Marc-Andre Fleury X stop in period 1 on the power play for the Vegas Golden Knights, just the scrambles in front. He changed the series, but Stankoven saved their series in game 2 their season, because that building was dead. Vegas was going to march to a 2-0 lead in the series. They were up 2-0. All they needed was an empty netter, and that was going to be it. And they're up 2-0 and home free going to the Stanley Cup. The building came alive. The team rallied. The team rallied in game 3. Even though they lost, they showed they could rally, and they faced adversity, and they never looked back. And I agree with you. The discussion amongst the media in Carolina around Carter Hart was he looks tired. He looks fatigued. He hasn't played a lot. And why did it? And I know where the reporter was coming from. When you're down 4-1, why don't you give your guy a break and let the backup goalie just take some reps? Because Carter Hart needed a break. He played too much. And while his game 6 wasn't bad and was better than a lot of the other games, he still gave in a bad first goal to Taylor Hall. And it was just Carolina just came on and found their game in period 2 of game 5, and they never looked back.
No, they really didn't. And, you touched on, Jordan Staal, oldest player to win the Conn Smythe. Unbelievable, tied the record, 5 straight games with a goal. Before his goal scoring streak in the Stanley Cup final, he wasn't even in the conversation for the Conn Smythe. Not to say he was having a bad postseason, but he wasn't on the radar of the Conn Smythe. Like, you can still be having a good postseason without being on the radar as MVP.
No.
And then he just came out and he had a series for the ages, cemented his legacy. Unbelievable. And I know, as you said, with him, shaking his hands in his head on the ice, all-time great goal, all-time great highlight there. But, Jim, I want to compare something that you said with Brandon Bussy. You said how, he's an unorthodox goalie, and when the system breaks down, he can it'll do. Reminded me so much of 2 other cup-winning goalies. Jonathan Quick with LA, and Mike Richter with the Rangers.
100%. 100%.
Both of them unorthodox goalies, both athletic goalies. Neither of them ever stayed true. I know Jonathan Quick always had the RVH that he sort of relied upon, and there wasn't really names for these things back when Richter was, winning the Cup in '94. But Bussy's unorthodox, unconventional style matches the 2 of them perfectly. And just like the 2 of them, won the Cup.
And he also stopped a penalty shot.
And the Stanley Cup. He literally, if Mike Richter and Jonathan Quick, you took the DNA from both of them and turned it into an NHL goalie, that NHL goalie is Brandon Bussy.
Well, Long Island boy, so he wins the Cup and he gets a shutout, saves his best game for last in game 6. I mean, the Stankoven Hall Blake line was their best line all playoffs, and they had another fantastic game in game 6. They just dominated. It'd feel good for a guy like Nikolai Ehlers, who comes over, free agent, wasn't really utilized properly late in games in Winnipeg. And Rod Brindamore just throws him out there late in games, gets 2 huge empty net goals one in game 4, one in game 6. And how funny is it? I saw this online. How funny is it? Nikolai Ehlers opens the scoring for Carolina in the Stanley Cup final, ends the scoring for Carolina in the Stanley Cup final. He bookends the Stanley Cup final with goals, and he wins the Stanley Cup, and it's just a feel-good story for Nikolai Ehlers because he should have been trusted more in Winnipeg, could have been out there with the game on the line, or when the team needed a big goal and big point, and they go out and get him. And I see a lot of people are saying team of not superstars, no superstars, kind of writing their own book. Well, I'm going to give a little bit of a history lesson to some people. While we view Scott Niedermayer and Scott Stevens and Marty Brodeur as superstars now, when the New Jersey Devils were winning Stanley Cups, they didn't have – those guys weren't superstars. They weren't even viewed as stars. And they won as a team, and Carolina just did the same thing.
They did, and, the teams that go on to win championships more often than not. And now, again, every now and again, you will have a super team in whatever sport. Teams that often go on to win it all are, quote unquote, better than the sum of their parts. And that's Carolina. They're better than the sum of their parts. Yes, they don't have a superstar player. They don't have a top 10, top 15 player in the league. But they are more than what they come together. They gelled together more than what they are individually. And, I have the stat here for a second. Nikolai Ehlers, so he had 9 points in the Stanley Cup final. Jordan Staal had 7 points. Shane Gottsberg had 6. Jackson Blake had 5. Sebastian Aho had 5. Andrei Svechnikov had 4. Logan Stankoven had 4. Taylor Hall, whose career was supposed to be over by now, had 3. Seth Jarvis, all these guys, they all chipped in. You didn't have that Mitch Marner who's going and having, 20 points in 15 in 10 games type of. You had all these guys chip in. And when you roll 4 lines, when you roll 3 defensive pairs, when you're able to do this, that's what makes a champion. And that's something, honestly, we overlooked it both in just how much Carolina was able to gel when we were both picking Vegas. Not to say that Vegas didn't gel, because Vegas obviously did, but Carolina was the better team, and kudos to them for winning the cup.
Well, yeah, and they broke them, right? They broke them. They finally broke them with their system that wears you down. Death by 1,000 cuts, as they say, right? Death by 1,000 cuts. They just pound you. The forecheck gets on you, and then William Karlsson gets hurt. So that's a loss. Now your lineup has to look different. And the older defense is being exposed on Vegas, and Rasmus Anderson's just not looking good. And Noah Hannafin, well, he had a decent series, didn't play great. And Carter Hart is just being fatigued because Carolina just continues to come in waves, and that storm just continues to come over you, no pun intended. But it's just what you saw in Game 5 is what Carolina was in the first 3 rounds, and it just carried over into Game 6. And once they scored that second goal, it was pretty much shut the lights out because nothing. When Bussy was making all those crazy saves in the first period and into the second, they're like, nothing's getting by him tonight.
Yeah, no, you saw it, and as much as, maybe with blinders on, people want to say, oh, well, Vegas, we were picking Vegas, so we were just like, we still think Vegas is going to come back, and I went on the Bottle Rocket podcast on Saturday morning, and I said, I firmly believe that Vegas is going to force a Game 7. Vegas really, they didn't have anything left in the tank. Once William Karlsson went down, once Bussy just turned the series, just the momentum was just all in Carolina's favor. And that's really all there is to it. I know people will try to dissect things and try to be like, oh, well, there has to be a deeper cause. There has to be a deeper. Sometimes one team can just completely wear down the other, and the momentum just rolls downhill until it can't be stopped.
Right. The best team in the National Hockey League all year was the Carolina Hurricanes, despite the Colorado Avalanche winning the President's Trophy. Carolina Hurricanes were the best team all year, and they proved it. And the goaltending was there, coaching was there, and as Rod Brindamore said after the game, luckily for them, they were healthy, and that's what you need during a championship run. You've got to be healthy, and like you said before, 16-3. The only other team that was better were the Oilers, 16-2. I mean, that's 88, 87? Like, that's 88. It was the 88 Oilers. That's pretty impressive. They dominated. And maybe if they go to Bussy earlier, maybe the series is done earlier.
Anything's possible. And speaking of anything being possible, Jim, I believe it's time for our non-existent sponsor break so we can get to our special guest of the show, Aaron Portzline from The Athletic, who covers the Anything is Possible Columbus Blue Jackets, who looks like they were going to make some noise this year. Then they didn't, but they were in it till the end. And they have a very interesting Anything is Possible offseason coming up for them. So, Jim, we'll be back with more Blue Line Blast podcast after this non-existent sponsor break. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back from our non-existent sponsor break. Once again, I'm Matthew Blittner. That's co-host Jim Biringer. And we're joined now on the Blue Line Blast podcast by a first-time guest, very special guest of the evening, from The Athletic, covers the Columbus Blue Jackets, Aaron Portzline. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. Good to be with you guys.
Yeah, so, Aaron, we're going to get into the Blue Jackets in a little bit, but first, the Stanley Cup final just came to an end in 6 games. Carolina beat Vegas in 6. Both Jim and I were predicting that Vegas would win. What were you thinking going into the series, and did that shift at all?
I'd have to look. I know I had Carolina. I think I had them in 7. I don't think I'm smart enough to have had them in 6. Great series. And I love series because there's a point in any series where the other team knows it doesn't have the answer anymore. And I thought that was in game 5 for Vegas, a little bit in game 6 halfway through as well. Congrats to Carolina, incredible team depth. What I love about this postseason, guys, is all of the narratives, all of the things we thought we knew that have been dispelled, right?
Yeah.
That Carolina can't win the big one. They can't even get there because they don't have the guy at the top, the superstar at the top. Well, that's gone bye-bye. Mitch Marner can't perform in the postseason. I know he wasn't great in the final 3 games. Nobody was on Vegas, but he was incredible in these postseason guys, right? Freddie Anderson's not a good playoff goalie. He was fantastic until he got hurt. Like, you could go on and on. John Tortorella, the game has passed him by like BS, right? Like, the guy, they lost. I understand that. But to get that team was in rough shape when he took over under Cassidy. Not guaranteed to make it. Just, boom, became an absolute meteor under Tortorella. So a lot of stuff to watch. I didn't really have a rooting interest in this one, but boy, was it entertaining, especially for the first 4 games.
I want to stay on Carolina for a second, Aaron, because all 3 of us see this team constantly throughout the year being in the Metro Division, obviously with the Devils and the Columbus Blue Jackets. But what does it say about this team that's been so dominant in the regular season now to have a dominating performance in the Stanley Cup playoffs, to go 16-3 and to have to use their quote-unquote backup goalie who won 31 games this year to ice the cup?
I think what it says, this was their year. And Anderson gets hurt. That's a very uncomfortable time for a team when the guy who's been your goalie throughout the playoffs now he's out, right? Bussy hasn't seen a live shot in how long? And he comes in, and once he gains his footing, excuse me, then you start to realize you've got an advantage now because your goalie is fresh, right? He was so good. He was just a real boost for them at the end. I think it was just their year. I think we're too quick to change course in sports. I don't think because there's so much outcry now and so many people have the ability to be vocal. There's so much interaction now. I think it's harder for teams to stay the course. And I credit Carolina for they add every year. I mean, they added Nikolai Ehlers. That's a hell of a player. But they haven't gone the Kachuk route. They haven't looked for that guy that 100.45 goal guy at the top to change their dynamic. They just said, this is what the Hurricanes do, and it's going to fall our way. Those sweeps in the early part of the playoffs are huge because they got a nice, big, deep breath before each round. And I think it benefited them in the end. But I think they were as competitive as Vegas was. and physically competitive. And once Vegas realized they could not physically overwhelm them, that they just weren't going to go away. 3 goals, 39 seconds. Even they lose that game, but just the message that game sent, that team just would not go away. And I think they prevailed because of that in the end.
A great synopsis of Carolina, but, to go to the other team for a second, I mean, you got to know John Tortorella pretty well when he coached Columbus. And while you brought up, obviously, that Freddie Anderson, the Carolina only switched to Bussy because of an injury to Anderson.
Yeah.
And Vegas, obviously, they didn't have an injury to their goalie, Carter Hart. But you can make the case that John Tortorella made a mistake by sticking with Hart. I mean, he had an all-time worst Stanley Cup performance by a goaltender, just stats-wise.
Yeah.
And he didn't make the change. So why do you think that was? I mean, he had a cup-winning goalie in Adin Hill sitting on the bench.
He did, although Adin Hill has not played well, right? And so coaches would see things up close that we do not see. They would know things that we don't see. I think knowing Tortorella can, this is going to be a news breaker here for you. John Tortorella can be a bit hard-headed at times.
They're real hard-headed.
I'd say that if you were here, we've stayed in touch. We get along fine. We've had our moments, but we do get along well. I think he saw the goals that Carter Hart gave up, a lot of them, and he is of a mind with a lot of those. I can't put that on the goalie. I can't put that one on the goalie. Now, a lot of coaches would change, especially when the other team changes. It becomes easier to change. He's not a change for change sake guy. I also think he probably heard the grief that Carter Hart was taking. It's up to anybody listening to this to decide if the grief is warranted or not. The no means no chance, right? That could not have been easy. Again, no sympathy here. It's up to you to decide if he deserves any. I'm sure Tortorella thought this is a guy that needs someone to stick beside him right now. And he is, if you look at all of the times that John Tortorella has lost his on questions, it's really not the question. It's the fact that someone he feels is coming after one of his players. That's always the response that gets his back up. And he almost feels like that is half of his job is to protect and defend his players. That's how he sees it. And I wouldn't look at him changing the goalie in that situation as him not having his players back. You're in the cup final here. But he's also I go with the guys who got me here type coach. So that really doesn't surprise me. It is a fair argument, a fair critique. Why not change up the thing? I thought Carter Hart played pretty well in Game 6. But you do want to change I understand also wanted to change the momentum a bit.
No, that's a fair point. And you mentioned hard-headedness and maybe stubbornness a little bit. Could we say the same thing about the current head coach of the Columbus Blue Jackets and Rick Bowness? Does he have that little bit of stubbornness, hard-headedness to him, considering where he came from in Winnipeg, now there in Columbus, and the way he had another outburst similar to what he had in Winnipeg after the season was over? Yeah,
it is very similar. I'm not sure if it's hard-headedness or if it's frustration. It's interesting how he felt the two situations are so similar, and I think he would do it again because I don't think he takes any of it back. I don't think he regret. I know he doesn't regret it. I think he probably would dial back on some of the stuff, but I think he meant all of it. And the message that I've clung to sort of here as we get deeper into summer is, if that pissed off some players such that they go into the offseason pissed off and unsure about where they stand and uncertain about what training camp is going to be next year and not really knowing what they think their role is on this team, I think he's okay with that. So misinterpret it if you want. Take it this way if he didn't mean it that way. Whatever. He wants players on edge. He doesn't feel like they're on an edge enough here. Too comfortable. So he'll be okay with it.
Well, speaking of players being on edge, I mean, I guess the elephant in the room that we've got to get to at some points here, and you've been covering this very well for The Athletic. The Edmonton Oilers are looking to bring in I guess we can legitimately call him the former Columbus coach in Mike Babcock, even though he never actually coached a game. Now the Columbus players who were there 3 years ago have to sort of have their wounds reopened. They have to sort of, speak on this again. Can you talk to us what you're hearing about that Columbus players now, they're on edge for not a good reason?
Yeah, and honestly, I don't even know if they are on edge. I'm sure some of them are unhappy to have their summers interrupted with this story that they wanted to have put behind them 3 years ago. But it's super quiet on that front right now, like to the point where you wonder if there's been a no talk directive sent across the league to them anyways. It's bizarre. And I have no idea what the hell's going on in Edmonton this year with this coaching search. Is just completely bungled from the start. You ask a division rival for permission to talk to their former coach, then you wonder how it got leaked because you haven't fired your own coach yet. I mean, this is some minor league stuff. Even minor league people would be fired for doing stuff so haphazardly. And now they can't get Cassidy. I'm not sure I blame Vegas. That's a division rival, their biggest division rival. I think they finished 1-2 again this year. Vegas learned the hard way 4 or 5 years ago. They fired Pete DeBoer. And at the time, their biggest rival, the Dallas Stars, not in the same division, but in the Western Conference, asked them for permission to speak to DeBoer, hired DeBoer. 2 years later, DeBoer beat them in the playoffs. And Vegas said, never again. Pete DeBoer knew that team. He knew the team that he beat, knew him inside and out. He'd coached them. He knew their weaknesses, their frailties, all of those things. So, I mean, I don't like it. It's not typical. Most teams do give permission and allow a coach to move on. But I kind of understand this one. And now they've moved on to another guy that they have to wait for, pending an NHL investigation. My biggest issue is what happened in Columbus was ugly. It should never be tolerated. It's not a case of today's athletes or, guys today can't handle a tough That's awful behavior in any era. You just don't treat people that way. But Columbus also isn't even the worst of it, right? It's not the worst of it. Go talk to Johan Franzen. Investigate Johan Franzen. Talk to Nicholas Lidstrom, who I don't know this myself, but it's been reported that he retired a year early because of Mike Babcock. Talk to Chris Chelios. That's not a nouveau player. That's not a modern guy who's soft around the edges. It's Chris Chelios. What does he think of him, right? Talk to those guys. Now, I understand that you're not just hiring nice guys to coach. That's not what this is. But when you've been to 4 different NHL stops and you have charges of psychological / mental abuse literally at all 4 stops, I think we may be onto something. I think we may have a trend there we can recognize. And so I just don't know why you'd want that guy coaching your team, period.
No, that's a great point. I mean, especially if there's got to be an investigation. I mean, we see it in other sports. It's like, maybe we shouldn't be hiring that guy or going down that route. I mean, I don't know what Edmonton's doing. I mean, I saw some people at the final. They're like, Edmonton is a complete mess right now. They don't even know what they're doing. Like that's what some were saying. It's ridiculous. The fact that they're bringing back Mike Babcock, and again, opinions, everybody can have them on Mike Babcock, but the fact that he's under investigation at the time and now still under investigation, I think the Edmonton Oilers probably should go in a different direction.
It seems like they're out of ideas.
Yeah, it does. Just staying on Columbus for a second, it's big offseason for them. They have several pending unrestricted free agents. And what is their biggest need, and who do you think they're going to keep?
Well, their biggest need is the same as about 25 other teams, which is going to make it tough. Top 6 forward. And I have a theory too. We're starting to hear it a little bit in different places. These GMs have a sense of the market now. Not exactly. Things are going to change, but they have an idea of what teams are looking for, what's out there right now. When the market isn't good, teams that want top 6 forwards start talking about needing top 9 forwards. They almost sort of regulate themselves and their outlook and their wishes. We're starting to hear that in places now. So unclear what the market is going to be. I think there's going to be hockey trades this summer, which is exciting. Not just we got to get rid of this guy. What can we give you with him to unload? Or what can we take back from you to offset? I think there's going to be hockey trades. So that'll make it really interesting. The cap room helps facilitate that. There's not much in free agency. I think Tuck is going to price himself out of Columbus. He'll probably get what he's looking for. 7 years north of 11. Wow. So, yeah, I think there's going to be trades this year to get things done, and I think that's where it's going to be. As for who they keep, they have 3 prominent UFAs, Boone Jenner, Mason Marchment, and Goodbranson, the defenseman, Eric Goodbranson. If I had to bet, if I had to take some sort of variable on that, I would say that none of them are back. I think there's an outside chance that they go to market or that the Blue Jackets attempt to add another player leading up to free agency. And if that falls through, that they circle back on one or some of those, much like they did last year with Provorov. If you remember, they were in on Noah Dobson. It became clear he was going to Montreal, not Columbus. And at that point, Columbus circled back and kept their own guy, Ivan Provorov. It costs you more because once you start to put desperation into the mix, then the price tag goes up. And it did there too. But I like the approach where you're trying to get something done. Sort of hedge your bets. If you can't improve, you might as well you got to keep an NHL body. And I'm glad they kept Provorov. They wouldn't even have been competitive last year without him. He's a top 4D for them. And it could be the same with the forwards, but I won't be surprised if all 3 of them walk.
All right. Well, sticking with players who are of interest on Columbus, 2 catch my eye. I mean, if you look at Zach Werenski, I mean, he just won the Norris this year. And you really feel that he sort of like started to pop a couple of years ago. You know, if you look at his numbers, it was always pretty solid, but then you could really call the 23-24 season his sort of like coming out party. And then last year he took like the step into the elite. And then this year, obviously, he ascends to winning the Norris. And then you look up front, you've got Adam Fantilli, who is a restricted free agent this year. There was, obviously a lot of hype around Fantilli. I know he's had a couple injuries throughout the early part of his career. What do you make of the 2 of them? And are they, I mean, obviously Werenski is part of the nucleus, part of the core for Columbus. But, what do you make of the 2 young guys who could potentially take Columbus where they want to go?
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons I think Jenner's the captain. One of the reasons I think he has the possibility of walking is they feel like it's time for some of these guys. They want to clear space for some of these guys to become leaders on the team. And Fantilli is one of those guys. He's an incredibly competitive player. This year, the numbers didn't show a great offensive improvement, but he stepped into the number 1 center role. He wasn't that 2 years ago. Sean Monahan had a tremendous season. Well, Fantilli was for part of that, but not full time. Fantilli was this year because Monahan had injuries, backpedaled quite a bit. And Fantilli then took on checking the other team's best line almost every night. Help from Charlie Coyle in that line for sure, but they were out against him a lot. And his game really, really matured from the red line back, which I know is boring as hell. It's hard to measure in a lot of cases. But they see him now as the clear bona fide number 1 center. And I suspect that the numbers offensively are going to jump. I think he's got to learn to handle his frustration a little bit. He gets chances. He doesn't score. He gets visibly upset about it. He's incredibly competitive. They need that. I think they need to unleash him in the room as well. He's got to feel it, but they've got to, and I think they have. They've given space now for him to be more of that. He's a really good player up front. Kirill Marchenko is another name that people need to know about that may not. 30-goal scorer routinely. I think he's a 40-plus guy. He really struggled down the stretch last year when the games cranked up. First taste of real playoff hockey for him. Not even playoff hockey, but playoff style pressure to get in hockey. And when the games really ramped up, he struggled with that. So they need to determine here this year and the years forward if that's just his capacity or if that was a lesson for him this year that he now is prepared and sees the next level he's got to get to. What's really interesting is there's an enormous amount of pressure on this team now to win this season. And I say that because you've seen what's happened with Team USA players. You've seen what's happened with any players from any country who are in losing situations. They don't stay there long. Zach Werenski's got 2 years left on his contract. I reported this is a big year for them. They need to win. They need to prove to Werenski that he has a chance to win here. My colleague Pierre Lebrun is reporting less patience perhaps than even that, saying that maybe by the end of the summer, if things aren't looking like the Blue Jackets have done enough to win, there's whispers that maybe Werenski would consider it. I don't have the source that's telling me that. Pierre Lebrun does. He's reported as much. So these are the sort of high-pressure situations where the Blue Jackets are feeling the need to, deliver off the ice this summer, be on the ice in the fall. This has to change. They have made incremental improvements the last 4 years. They're on the way, but it's time now to take the next step. It's been time to take it.
Well, and they have a good general manager who likes to be aggressive in Don Waddell. And a couple of names that, kind of be out there in the rumor mill over the last couple of years has been Kent Johnson and obviously Elvis Merzlikins. Do you see, because they brought in Dante Fabro, who I was really high on in Nashville, and I thought he's come in and played pretty well in Columbus, giving the role that he's been given. But do you see those other two players potentially on the move as trade chips and to help this roster improve now so they can win?
So I think it's two different situations. I think they're scared to death to trade Kent Johnson because they know what's inside that player. They've seen it. Didn't see it last year at all. Saw it the year before. So far in his career, he's been an on-again, off-again player. Every other year he shows up. Can't have that, right? So he's got to get beyond that. He is the most skilled player on the team. Not even close. Yes, Werenski's on the team. Kent Johnson is the most skilled player on the team. He also is a light player. And something happened last year where he seemed to lose whatever physical progress he'd made the year before. So light on pucks. Got ragdolled constantly. He's never going to be a big guy, never going to be a power forward. But that sort of off-ice commitment and his level of competitiveness has to pick up. Merzlikins, totally different situation. He is not going to have his contract bought out. I confirmed that yesterday. But if you have to ask, right, not a good sign.
No.
I think there's a trade market there, maybe, but there wasn't one before. And I say maybe because of all the cap space now. I think teams may be a little bit more aggressive. I'm not sure it's a bad trade for somebody to make either, because I know Elvis has struggled for 4 years, but he may need a change of scenery as much as I think the Blue Jackets do from him. I think it's imperative that they change that position. I'm not sure they're going to. They have a starter in Jet Greaves, but Elvis has really struggled. Whenever you see the two goalies on the same team, more than 30 points apart on a save percentage, I say that's not the team. There's a disparity there with the goalies. I think they see Jet Greaves as a 50 to 55 start goalie. I think they'd be much better if they had a 25, 27, 30 game goalie who could have a save percentage somewhere around 9. And Elvis has not been close to that for 4 years now. So I feel like that's an area where they can really improve. We're talking about all these, who's going to be back and who isn't. If you're going to change the culture of a team, certainly you can do that by holding them to a higher standard. I don't think there's a quicker way to do it than by really upsetting what the room is like, changing the dynamic in the room. So if the captain leaves, I think that's part of that. I think the goalie could be a part of that as well, changing up that end of the dressing room, giving them a different look coming into the season, I think is really important.
I mean, that's a great observation on the Columbus Blue Jackets, because a lot of people have high hopes for this team and expect more given what we've seen around the league, especially with Montreal, Ottawa, Detroit, and Buffalo, all those teams, especially the first couple with Ottawa, Buffalo, and Montreal making the playoffs. I think a lot of people expect Columbus to be in the mix in the Metro Division. It's going to be an interesting off season for Columbus as well. But guys, this has been the Blue Line Blast podcast. Jim Biringer, Matthew Blittner, our special guest tonight, Aaron Portzline from The Athletic, who covers the Columbus Blue Jackets. Aaron, thank you so much for jumping on the Blue Line Blast podcast tonight.
Yeah, my pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Guys, take care. Blue Line Blast podcast up on YouTube. Please subscribe, like, and follow along.